Hi everyone, welcome to your first instructional video for Module 1, and welcome of course to this summer session 2. My goal here in this particular video is to set up in a general and then particular way some frameworks for our summer study together, all in the service of helping you move from observation, so just looking perhaps at surface or plot level features of any given text, to interpretation. So my goal is to help you formulate good questions to ask of any given text as you read, maybe even choosing a particular literary school of thought as you begin parsing these texts in an effort to get to a much deeper interpretive meaning. And of course this applies to collegiate level work, or as you're formulating lesson plans, working with students, whether in secondary or at the college level. There are 4 sources I'm going to be drawing from today, all of which you have available to you and are assigned. The primary is going to be Laurie Halse Anderson's Chains. That's going to be one of the particular examples I use later on. I'm also going to be taking a look at interpreting young adult literature really early on here in this particular video, and I'm going to take a look very briefly later on at The Distant Mirror, which is another one of your supplemental readings that give you a couple chapters from that particular text on young adult historical fiction. The last is the link to Purdue's online writing lab that's provided in that supplemental readings list as well in Module 1. I liked that link because I think it provides a nice primer for looking at literary schools of thought. And so I'm going to be referring to these 4 in this particular instructional video. I'll probably need a couple of these, so you can expect to see 2 of them in the module list, because I'm using right now the free version of something called Screencast-O-Matic, which is sort of maybe the 5th source that you might take note of here, since you might want to utilize it later on in the semester. Screencast-O-Matic is a free service. You can record up to 15 minutes at a time, so I'll probably need a couple of these videos here. And I really like it because I can use my webcam, I can show you things on my screen, and of course I like that it allows me to move very quickly from a discussion point to maybe a finer discussion point, a detail, to something larger or general that I'd like to accomplish with you. So that might be something to utilize later on in the semester. Let's go ahead and get started though with what I'd like to accomplish here in this video. General questions for inquiry, and these come directly from Moore's text. So the very first quotation actually that he uses, and you might hear me flipping around here because I like to be able to read to you if I like, but these really I literally quoted, so they come directly from page 8 of that really short reading that I gave you. And these questions involve: how does the literary theory or theory define the literary qualities of the text? What relation does the theory propose between the text and the author? So how should text and author relate? What role does the theory ascribe to the reader? So again, how should the reader behave according to the text? So for example, you might see in the 19th century text a lot of references to "dear reader." So you're being kind of hailed there by the narrator of, say, I don't know, perhaps a Bronte text or something like that. The 4th question is: how does the theory view the relationship between the text and reality, right? So how does any given theory connect the world of the text to the reality outside of the text? And the last question that's quoted in the Moore text here is: what status does the theory give to the medium of the text, language? So what status does language occupy in any given text according to a theory? Now, I'll say for me, as I read those first 5 questions, they're very broad, very general, and if you don't have a good grounding in large, highfalutin words like theory that take a while to unpack, you might find yourself saying something like, wait, what? You know, so you've just gotten into this introductory chapter and you're left wanting after these 5 questions. I wanted to kind of go through, if I could, and restate these questions, giving a little bit of explanation before going on and becoming even more granular, more specific in ways that you can approach texts. So a theory is a set of principles, right? We might call it an ideology, we might call it a position, right? So a theory is a set of principles that we might utilize not just for reading, but for living, right? So I've actually replaced the word theory with the phrase set of principles. So let me kind of go through these in this way, giving some explanation, as I said. Number 1, how does the set of principles, so the set of rules we apply to a text, define its features? So that might give you a little better handle on that. And when we're talking about its features, we literally mean its literary elements, right? The way it's presented to us, the language used, the style of any given text. The second question, how does the set of principles want readers to connect or disconnect the author from the text? An example of what I mean here, a way for clarification, or a way towards clarification rather, would be maybe thinking a little bit about the way you learned Emily Dickinson poetry in high school or maybe even college English. A lot of teachers choose to begin immediately with a great deal of biographical information about Emily Dickinson. So you learn about her, her ailments, her desire not to go outside, her desire to go outside, but being prevented from doing so, what inspired her art, whether or not she was ever in love, the visitors that came to see her, the diaries, the letters. So you might have learned a great deal of Emily Dickinson biographical information, lore, maybe even some specific quotations from historical documents. And then you got to the poetry, right? Another way at a study of Emily Dickinson's poetry is just to read it and notice its features, notice the way in which it's constructed, the meaning, without actually discussing a great deal of the biography. You can still learn a great deal about the poems. So in the second question, you'll see a great deal of importance if you're thinking about ways in which you'd like to teach or not teach, right? The third question that's interesting, what does the set of principles, the theory, ask the reader to do when experiencing the text? So again, going back to my example of the 19th century novel, how is it that the text hails the reader? So H-A-I-L-S. How is it the text addresses the reader, right? What is the role that you're placed in as the reader of a text? For example, when you're reading a drama, you're placed quite literally in the position of a character if you're assigned a role. You might feel strangely out of your depth when you first begin reading a play because you're asked to hold in mind all of the characters' words as well as the stage direction. The fourth question, reworded for clarity, I think. How does the set of principles connect the text to the world? So how does the theory, the ideology, connect the text to the world? That is, how is it that the text mirrors the world, reflects it, or illuminates the world in some way? The reverse can be true as well. How does the text refashion the world? If you're thinking, for example, about an Impressionist painting, there was a great hullabaloo about those paintings because up until then, you had art that was highly representational. If you painted a water lily, it looked like one. And then all of a sudden you've got Impressionists and then Post-Impressionists who come along, and really the guiding principle for them was light. They wanted to reflect in their imagery light in the world. And so you got less representationality in their work. So how does the theories, the rules of Impressionism, how do they connect the text to the world? Well, if you're just looking at it from a representational mindset, you thought what a lot of people at the time thought. The contemporaries thought, this is not art. This is horrific. This is heresy. But if you were looking at it from the point of view of the Impressionists, you saw what they were trying to accomplish, which was the quality of light and color as reflected in objects, often in nature, as we know. So the fifth question here, and this is, I think, the most difficult one, and then we'll move on probably to our next video. What does the set of principles ask us to do as we consider the role of language of the text or in the text? What does the theory then ask us to do when we consider how language functions in any given text? This one is a little strange because we just assume that the function of language is to tell the story. But of course, post-structuralists, speaking from their particular set of principles, would in fact say that language is slippery, that we cannot expect language to be as solid as we would like. So language is full of pitfalls, and that at any moment it can slip out from under you. So for example, if you're approaching Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, you see it as a novel, it looks like a novel, you open the cover, it even begins a bit like a novel. And in that, I mean letters line up to make words, words line up to make sentences and paragraphs. We have characters and character development. But about 3 pages in, you recognize that you are not within the world of the novel. Language is not doing what it's supposed to do in Mrs. Dalloway because Woolf is writing in stream of consciousness. And so this last question really asks the role of language in the text. How is language not just telling a story, but also disrupting that story at the same time? So hopefully this recapitulation gives you a little bit more to go on. And of course, we're going to move on to get a little more specific with these 5 questions. I want to get specific with an example. I was in the mood for Superman today. So I've actually gone in and given you the high points in the Clark Kent story, or we could call him Kal-El. He's an alien sent away from his exploding planet. He lands on Earth. Kents find him. They rear him as a human boy. He develops superpowers. He must hide them, though, therefore developing a dual identity. By day, we know he's Clark Kent. And then, of course, when crime occurs, he zips away as Superman and saves common people from small crimes. And then, of course, he defeats foes that are much larger, even sometimes nations of foes. In the realm of love, as we all know, Clark works with Lois Lane, a reporter who has much moxie, but he also has eyes for Lois as more than a co-worker. But of course, she has eyes for Superman. I'm going to go to the next video now, but you kind of start or continue to ruminate on old Superman here. Be back in a minute. Go on to the next one, please.